Good morning and welcome to Managerial Accounting. We are going to be finishing up the final three exercises for Chapter 17 today. So we'll pick up with Exercise 8 from Chapter 17 and do 8, 9, and 10. We'll take a brief pause and then we'll start Chapter 18. So as we look at our calendar, on Tuesday, when we didn't finish the Chapter 17 exercises, I told you in class and I put in the announcement that the Chapter 17 exercises only, the due date was being changed to today. But I did look at the Chapter 17 problem, and with what we had done through Tuesday, we had completed everything that you would need to be able to do the Chapter 17 problem. And so officially that due date did not change. You know it's always the case if you're not done with that and you need more time, the assignment will stay open for you in See Now. So if you want to work on it tomorrow or after today, over the weekend, whatever, you are welcome to do that. That being said, as you know, it's better to stay on track because we will keep moving forward. Today we will be starting Chapter 18, and so the Chapter 18 pre-quiz should be submitted for grading by the end of the day. Looking ahead to next week then, we should be on track to still, even though we're behind, we should be back on track by Tuesday to finish Chapter 18. 18 isn't as intensive maybe as Chapter 17. So we should be back on track to finish Chapter 18 on Tuesday. Then the 18th problem is due on Thursday. And Chapter 18 is the last chapter for our first exam. So we have 4 exams this semester. We're covering 14 chapters. So the exams cover 4, 3, 4, 3 chapters. A little bit different for those of you who had me for financial accounting when we had 5 exams, 3 chapters on most of them, 2 on one. This semester we have only 4 exams. So this first exam, which you'll be taking next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend, that exam will cover chapters 15, 16, 17, and 18. Also, looking ahead, you'll notice that there's nothing due on Tuesday the 22nd. And the reason for that is because that's not a class day. It's the same length. We'll look at the exam. So the question in the classroom was, because it has more chapters, will it have more questions than a exam that you would have taken for me for financial accounting? And I would say no, it's basically the same length. The software actually tells me how long the average student takes to complete each question. So when I put together the exam, I'm paying careful attention to the time that the average student would take. And basically your 3-hour time limit is twice as much time as the average student would take. And if you have accommodations, you have even longer than that. So yeah, you should have plenty of time. You should not expect to spend any more time than whatever you normally spent for me for financial accounting. I know we have a couple people who did not have me for financial accounting. Next week, we will, I don't know whether it'll be Tuesday or Thursday. If we have time on Tuesday, we'll do it on Tuesday. Otherwise, on Thursday, we will actually look at the exam and we'll see exactly how many questions there are, what types of questions are on there, and I'll explain about the practice set for those of you who maybe did not have me for financial accounting. So, and actually, I'll just mention that now. In Cengage, there is a practice set of exercises for each exam. So when I make the exams, I'll have to think about how I would do that. And also I need to, go ahead.
can I say more questions maybe?
I can definitely put more questions on there, yes. And I need to remind people, luckily that was not something confidential, Sharon, because when there are people in the classroom, you can't chat me privately because they can see it on the screen. So I'm glad that wasn't anything that was of a private nature. And I should remind people when you use the chat, even if you think you're just sending it to me because the screen is on in the classroom, and so they're seeing exactly what I see, the only way for me to open the chat is for people in the classroom to be able to see what's there. So the question was, basically, could I put more on the practice set? And I'm happy to do that. I carefully choose the questions that go on there so that they somewhat mirror the questions that are on the exam. So I make the exam and then I look at, okay, what did I put on here that's the doing part of accounting? And then I go find an exercise that looks like that. So I'm a little hesitant to add more questions because I don't want to put things on there that I know aren't on the test, because that seems like a bait and switch kind of thing. But let me see if I can come up with more questions that are representative of what's on the test. I don't want to make it so that people think it's overwhelming and they don't do it at all. But those practice questions on the practice set they're not graded per se. It doesn't directly impact your grade. They're optional. Some people clearly find them beneficial. Others may not ever look at them. I can see if you worked on the practice set. I would be glad to help you if you have questions on the practice set. Do I look at who did it? No, not really, other than for my own information, just curiosity to know how many people are working on those. As long as there's one person doing them, I'm happy about that. But if you don't do so well on the test, meaning you're not happy with your performance and you ask me, I don't know what else I can do, it's going to be the first thing I look at is, did you use all the resources that were out there? Are you doing all of the assignments, including, are you working on that practice set? So again, it is optional. It is not directly included in your grade, but I do think it has a positive impact on people's exam scores. And the exams are something like 50% of your total grade, something like that. I have to look at the syllabus to tell you 100% for sure how much, but it's quite significant. So I think they're helpful. They are intentionally designed to help you know whether you are ready for that test, to give you more practice. But I will look at that, Sharon, to see if I can come up with more questions that don't have you practicing things that aren't necessarily on the test. Okay. So any questions about what's coming up, what's due when, anything like that? Last thing I was saying, looking at the calendar, the 21st and the 22nd, you do not have any classes at all. So if you're taking asynchronous online classes, just be aware that some instructors may not build due dates around those 2 days being off, and that's fine. It's an asynchronous online class. But if you have other classes that normally have something due on Tuesday, it's probably still due on Tuesday, even though we don't have class that day. For our purposes, for this class, you can see the exam is due on Sunday. And so some of you might have school children who are also off that weekend for the long weekend because it's President's Day weekend. And so if you want to not have to worry about the exam in the middle of your break, then I would just suggest that you take it before the weekend starts. So, anytime after you finish that chapter 18 problem, which is officially due on the 17th, but you're welcome to submit it at any time before that. If you want to finish the exercises in class on Tuesday, do the problem on Wednesday and take the exam Wednesday or Thursday, Friday, you are more than welcome to do that. Any questions before we move on with chapter 17? Okay. So we're going to be starting with exercise 8. We've addressed any questions people had from part B of exercise 7. That's where we left off on Tuesday. So let's look at exercise 8. AccuBlade Castings Incorporated casts blades for turbine engines. Within the casting department, alloy is first melted into a crucible, then poured into molds to produce the castings. On May 1st, there were 230 pounds of alloy in process, which were 60% complete as to conversion. We know Alexis's rule tells us all of the direct materials were already in there and they were then performing the work, which was 60% done. The balance in work in process for those, that beginning inventory was $32,844. You can see the breakdown there. During May, they moved another 2,500 pounds of alloy into production. They added $350,000 worth of cost for that. And they added some direct labor and then applied overhead based on that direct labor. The department transferred out 2,530 pounds of finished castings to the machining department. The May 31st inventory in process was 44% complete as to conversion. So for today, as much as possible, and I think we can finish these without actually using that template, but certainly with this information that we have, you could go through the whole process of completing that Excel template. I don't think we're going to need that to be able to do what we need to do here. But if anyone, as we're going through this, if you find it difficult to follow, please let me know and we can work it through the template. The first thing we're asked to do is prepare the May journal entry for the casting department for materials charged to production. So we're told that we moved $350,000 into production for direct materials. So I know that the journal entry is going to be for $350,000. We moved it from where? Out of materials into work in process for the casting department. Then we also added our conversion costs. So our conversion costs include direct labor, and we are told that the direct labor was $19,840. So that would come from wages payable and go into work in process for the casting department. But the other part of those conversion costs is the factory overhead. We have to apply the factory overhead, and I need my calculator. We have to apply the factory overhead, and the information given tells us we apply overhead at a rate of 150% of direct labor. So we start with our direct labor of $19,840 and we multiply by 150%. And the overhead we would apply would be $29,760. Both of those two pieces, the direct labor and the overhead, are added into work in process. Make sense?
This is one question. I do not see the house that you get one factory overhead and the
Yep. So the factory overhead is, the answers are different, two different answers. Okay. The question in the classroom was, how did we know that those were credits to factory overhead into wages payable. So the factory overhead is the application of overhead. We move it out of the overhead account and into work in process. So the overhead account is a cost account, not an expense because it doesn't show up on the income statement. It's part of the product cost, but it is a cost account. We accumulate those costs. The actual costs are being added or debited to that account, and then the application moves it out of overhead into work in process. We could see that if we went to the reference materials folder, if I can remember which chapter has my flow chart in it. 15 maybe. My little hand-drawn flow chart here. So we can see that the overhead, the actual costs are being added to that cost pool or cost account and then allocated out from there. And actually this will help us see the labor cost as well. So the payroll expense, the part that are period expenses, so selling, general, administrative expenses get reported as expense, and then we pay our workers. So the credit side is showing the payable, the liability to pay it, or a credit to cash to show we actually paid them. The debit side is to record the cost or the expense part. So the period expenses, selling, general, and administrative, you'd be recording wages expense or salaries expense. The part that's direct labor is part of work in process. And so this credit to wages payable is to show the liability to pay our workers for what we owe them. The debit side is to work in process because it's direct labor and it's being added to the work in process account. Does that make sense? And I'm thinking about this next entry. It might be easier for us to see this by using the template. Unfortunately, it's going to take us a little bit. I could show you the calculations, I could walk you through them, but I'm encouraging you to use the template to help kind of organize the information. So I think I better do that as well, rather than just trying to show you all of the calculations on the screen without that organizational pattern to it. So let me find the template here. And we'll go ahead and complete the template. So I think this will help people see where the numbers come from because it's putting it in that format that I'm trying to get you accustomed to using. So remember steps 1 and 2, and everyone hopefully remembers where to find that template. It's in the reference materials folder for chapter 17, and it's just the link right there to the template. Reminder, I also put up here on Tuesday the completed one from exercise 6 so you can see where the formulas are coming from if you find that helpful. So at the beginning of the month, we had 230 units, 230 pounds of the alloy already in process, and we added 2,500 more during the period. So in step 1, we just have to determine how many pounds do we need to account for. In step 2, we actually account for those. We've gone through the equivalent units calculations many times, so I think you should be able to do this on your own. So I'm just going to quickly talk through it. If you do have questions, please stop me. Feel free to work ahead if it's more beneficial for you to try this on your own. So Alexis's rule tells us that we have all the direct materials already in there. Then we start stirring the pot. Then we start doing the work. The work for those 230 units that were in beginning inventory, we were told at the top of the exercise that they were already 60% complete. So that means we had how much more work to do? 40%. We had to do 40% of the conversion work, which is equivalent to 92 whole units. 40% of 230 is 92. We're also told then that we transferred out 2,530 pounds of finished castings. 230 of those were from the beginning inventory. Remember, we're using the FIFO method, so the first thing we do is finish up that beginning inventory. Then we start some more units. We started 2,500 units, and 23 of those were finished. That means there were 200 still in ending inventory. We'd started 2,500, we finished 2,300. That means there were 200 left. The 2,300 are the units started and completed, so we incurred all of the direct materials and all of the conversion costs, direct labor and overhead. All of those were completed in this period, in the month of May. Alexis's rule tells us that for the ending inventory, we added all the direct materials, but we haven't done all of the conversion work. And the very last sentence before part A1 in the exercise tells us the May 31st inventory was 44% complete. So we had done 44% of the work. That's equivalent to 88 whole units worth of work, 44% of 200. So there's steps 1 and 2. Remember, they are just units, no dollars yet, only units there. Does anyone have questions about what we've done up to this point? Moving on then to step 3, which is the cost summary. Total costs incurred this period. So what did we add for direct materials in the month of May? And there's a whole, let's see, it says we're charged $350,000 for direct materials. Then we had the $19,840 for direct labor, plus the overhead allocation. I know we already had that number in the template, or excuse me, in the exercise, $49,600. That's the combination of the direct labor and the applied overhead, applied at a rate of 150% of the direct labor dollars. We then divide by the units that we calculated in step 2 to get our cost per unit for this month. In the exercise, we're told that the beginning inventory balance was $32,844. Then we added the direct materials and the conversion cost this month. So the total cost to be accounted for, $432,444.
Where do we get the 49,600?
So we
Oh,
could,
there's, okay.
any other questions at this point before we go on to the final step, step 4? Since we're using the FIFO method, the first thing we do is complete that beginning inventory. We didn't have to add any more direct materials, but right here on row 12, we added 92 units of conversion costs. 92 units at our rate of $20 per unit. So we added $1,840 to what was already in there, $32,844. Those are the costs from April. All the direct materials, the first 60% of the conversion costs. For our units started and completed, again, we're going to pull the units. Whoops. The units and multiply by the cost per unit. So units from step 2 times cost per unit from step 3. And then total across. And then total down. Last step is the ending inventory. Whoops, sorry. 200 units of direct materials at $140 each. 88 units of conversion costs at $20 each. And if we've done this correctly, we need to find that these two numbers are the same. Total cost to be accounted for at the end of step 3 must be equal to the total cost accounted for at the end of step 4. So it did take us a little bit more work to get that information, but I think that will make it easier for you to see, to think about this information, and then be able to answer those questions. But I've done that on the screen, but I think that would probably be more confusing. So let's go answer our next question. Prepare the May journal entry for the casting department for the completed production transferred to the machining department. Total cost transferred out, right here, 402,684. I hope you all agree it was easier to use the template that at this point you should be more familiar with, rather than simply trying to calculate that separately. So these are the costs that were transferred out. They were transferred out of the casting department and into the machining department. So we know in this chapter, as we're using process costing, we know that most companies are going to have more than one step. They have a separate work in process inventory account for each work cell or step in their production process department, whatever you want to call it. And so what happens in one work cell is not completely dependent on what happens in another work cell. But as we've already pointed out, other than the very first step in the process, every other step in that process is going to have these transferred in costs that add a layer of complexity to the calculations. They literally add a column. So if we were using transferred in costs, if we were doing that, we would have another column here between whole units and direct materials for those transferred in costs. For this class, we're not doing that, but that's a much more common scenario actually. Determine the work in process for the casting department. And again, because we use the template, we already have that right here. Cost for ending work in process total $29,760. And here's another example of the same question that we had in part B for exercise 7. Compute and evaluate the change in the cost per equivalent unit. So they've given us the cost for, direct materials, $132. For this month, our direct materials cost is right here, $140. So what happened to it? There was an increase of $8 per month. It went from $132 to $140. And I did not mean $8 per month. I meant $8 in this month. In the month of May, it increased by $8 from $132 to $140. How about conversion costs? Last month, April, they were $18. This month, they are $20. That's exercise 8. And I, for one, am glad we didn't try to do that without using the template because, as I've already said, I think it gives us a structure for how we think about the costs and the calculations. JP?
What is the way you can tell that you use the template? That's if I was-
So I think the better question is, how do you know if you need the template or not need it? And when I looked at the first, I haven't done this exercise in a couple months. So when I looked at the first entry, I said, the first 2 entries that were showing on my screen here, I said, oh, we can do those. We don't have to do all the intricate calculations of equivalent units because these are very straightforward questions. How much did we move, do the journal entry for recording direct materials, do the journal entry for recording conversion costs. Didn't take any specialized calculations. But then when I got to the next entry where it says for the completed production, that becomes a little bit more complicated because as you can see, that's a number that comes from the bottom part of this template, if that's the way you want to think about it. So yes, I could have just gone through these calculations, but I really think using the template gives us that structure of how to think about it. And so don't shy away from using the template if you think it will help you to even if the question was just about equivalent units, it might be beneficial to use the template to do the units calculations. Because then you make sure you're not skipping a step, you're not forgetting about something because the format, the structure is already here for us. So as I said on Tuesday, there's never going to be a time on the homework problem, on the exam, where I say, okay, now turn in your template. It's totally for you, like scratch paper, right? So I'm not going to require you to demonstrate to me that you use the template. So use it anytime you think it would be beneficial. And if you look at the questions and they seem pretty straightforward and don't require you to go through all of the calculations, you probably don't need to use the template. It's not going to hurt. Does that answer your question? Okay, might as well get my green check marks in there. Make sure I don't have any silly math errors anywhere. Any other questions before we move on? So please make use of that template if it helps you, and if it's not necessary, then you don't need to bother.
Cindy, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the template pretty much an alternative to using all the formulas we have in the textbook? Because initially I was using the formulas and it just seemed like a lot of work, but the template is so much faster.
Yeah, I would say that is true. Yes, that using the template will help you avoid knowing which of those formulas to use because we have all of the formulas already here. The structure for the formulas already here. And in fact, as I pointed out at the beginning of class, or beginning of these exercises, on Tuesday, I even uploaded the completed cost report that has the formulas already in there. I am deliberately not putting those formulas into my template because I don't want you to use those as a crutch. I want you to realize what it is you're calculating. But you, because I've provided that to you, how you choose to use that completed template with the formulas already in there is totally up to you. I would just suggest if you're going to use that completed template that you make 100% sure before you start entering information for a new problem or exercise, that you make sure you took out any dollar amounts from that template. Because I can completely see myself thinking, oh, I'm just going to change these one at a time as I go through, and then forgetting to change one. Forgetting that the formula is 44%, not 50% or whatever, the part that's completed. So just be careful you don't make a mistake because you forgot to update something for a new problem. For this next exercise, Sharon, did that answer your question?
Yes.
For this next exercise, what I want to do is, I'm actually going to pause the recording. I want you to try this on your own, and I would suggest that you use the template for this. I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to fill out the template, and I would suggest that you complete the template on your own. See if you can answer these questions. This exercise is basically another try or a repetition of what we just did in the last exercise. The information is given to you a little bit differently, but you still have all of the information you need here in this file. So I'm going to pause the recording. Please try this exercise. You can use the check my work button to see if you're on track, and once you're done, restart the recording. So if we look at the template that we completed, I assigned our units based on beginning inventory and what percent it needed to be completed, the ending inventory, and so on. Completed step 3 with the cost summary, and then assigned the costs. So with this in mind, we should be able to answer all of the questions now that are asked. And so let's go to our exercise and see what it wants to know. Prepare the journal entry for the materials charged to production. So we can see that right here. That part we could have done without the template. It's provided to us. We move it out of materials into work in process for the paper making department, $330,750. Out of materials into work in process. Same thing for the conversion costs. They are given to us. So we have our direct labor that we know from the previous exercise is going to be credited to wages payable. Our overhead is going to be moved out of the overhead account. And the combination of those two which I know I have in my template already combined, but 95,355, that moves into our work in process account. These last two questions, just like in the previous exercise, are the reasons that having the template was helpful for us. I don't know if it was on the recording, so I'm going to say it again in case it was not on the recording before I paused. The book gives you formulas that you can use. The template really shows us that same approach, but without all of the maybe complicated formulas. Again, it gives you the structure for organizing the information. So I would strongly encourage you to use the template anytime you find it to be helpful. But there will not be a time that I require you to submit the completed template. So the next question is completed production transferred to what comes next. So total cost transferred out, we have that right here in the template, $420,925. And that moves out of the work in process for paper making and moves into work in process for the converting department. Last question. Determine the work in process paper making department balance. Round to 2 decimal places. We already have that rounding in the template. Your final answer to the nearest dollar. And so here's our ending work in process, $14,319. So that's one potential concern. It did not affect us here, but using the template, I did not round these numbers. It's only showing you 2 decimal places because I have it set to only show 2 decimal places. So it's not actually rounding, and I need to make sure you recognize that. In Excel, Just because I have it displaying 2 decimal places doesn't mean it doesn't have more decimal places there. I don't think there are any situations where say on the exam, that the problem would go out to more than 2 decimal places and rounding could be a concern. However, when you take the exam, if there's something like that, you'll just want to make sure that you're actually rounding as opposed to using the template where it doesn't round, it just cuts off the display. It will round that last decimal figure, but it's not what it displays, but it's not actually rounding it, it's just showing you. Does everyone understand that about Excel, right? It's set to show 2 decimal places. That's how I have it formatted. If you wanted to round, you would need to use the rounding formula, which is actually quite simple. You would just say equals round, whatever formula you want to put in there, put a comma, and then the number of digits that you want to round it to. So, and then Excel is actually rounding it. Just be careful about that, please. Any questions from exercise 9? Let's go on to exercise 10 then. This one's a little bit faster. As we've mentioned before, much of what we're using this semester in managerial accounting is geared specifically toward manufacturing companies, but we will on occasion point out how useful these techniques or accounting procedures might be useful for other types of organizations as well. And that's what we see here in exercise 10. We're using process costing for a service company. So they're not actually providing or producing a product, but they're selling a service. Madison Electric Company uses a fossil fuel, coal, plant for generating electricity. The facility can generate 900 megawatts, million watts, per hour. The plant operates 600 hours during March. Electricity is used as it is generated. Thus, there are no inventories at the beginning or end of the period. The March conversion and fuel costs are as follows. Madison also has a wind farm that can generate 100 megawatts per hour. The wind farm receives sufficient wind to run 300 hours for March. The March conversion costs for the wind farm, which are mostly depreciation, are as follows. Determine the cost per megawatt hour for the fossil fuel plant and the wind farm to identify the lowest cost facility in March. So for the fossil fuel plant, the total costs that they incurred during the month were $51,300,000. And that was for 900 megawatts per hour, and it ran for 600 hours. So we need to determine how many megawatts it produced. Get my annotate up here. So if they're producing, if they're producing 900, I have no idea what the abbreviation is for megawatts. I am making this up. Megawatt. No idea if that's an actual thing. 900 megawatts per hour times 600 times 600 hours. And so they would have produced, using my made-up abbreviation, megawatt. I have no idea.
That's what basically using per
Is it
dollars per MWH.
megawatt hour? Okay. I just need to put an H on there then. Cool. Okay. So 504. Oh no, because it would be 540,000 megawatts. I think that's correct. Way ahead. So our task for this is to find the cost per megawatt hour. So now we have the total cost, $51,300,000. 300,000. And we have the total megawatts for the month, 540,000. And I got $95 per megawatt. Everyone agree with that? Per megawatt hour. Megawatt hour. I haven't taken physics since high school. It's been a long time. I probably should go back and revisit what I don't remember. So unlike the coal-fired power plant, the wind farm does not have any supplies like fuel required because the wind is free. And so the only cost that we need to consider for the wind farm are those conversion costs. Again, we need to determine how much power was produced at the wind farm. So 100 megawatts per hour times 300 hours in March. And so they produced 30,000 megawatts for the month at a total cost of $2,700,000. For a cost of $90 per megawatt hour. Are the equivalent units of production needed in determining the cost per megawatt hour? And the answer is clearly no. We didn't do anything like that. And the reason is because there is no beginning and ending inventory because they're not able to store this product. So whatever they worked on during the month was also used during that month. There's no beginning and ending inventory. Question C, is the wind farm reliable for generating electricity? Is it always windy?
No, I don't think so.
I would agree, Seth. It's based on the information that we have here, we have concern. It only ran for 300 hours during the month. How many hours are there in a month? Standard month of 30 days. I know some have more and some have less, and one has less. But it's, let's say it's a 30-day month at 24 hours a day. That's 720 hours during the month that it could have been generating electricity, and it ran for 300 hours. So that would be the concern, right? All right. So we've got all our green check marks in there. This is the end of chapter 17. Before I stop this recording, does anybody have any questions or anything else you want to mention? All right, so I'm going to stop the recording. We'll switch over to our work for chapter 18, and then we'll start a new recording.